On this episode of China Unscripted, we are at war, and the enemy is inside the gate, the cyber gate, and the enemy is the CCP, just to be clear. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley John.
And I'm Matt Ganesha.
And joining us today is Bill Holstein, the co-author of the new book, Battlefield Cyber, How China and Russia Are Undermining Our Democracy and National Security. Well, Bill, thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, in one part of your book is called "We Are at War." Now, obviously, the bullets aren't flying. This is primarily a cyber warfare you're talking about. So,
it's fully integrated with traditional espionage and media manipulation, and so it's a complex campaign that China and Russia are waging to undermine our confidence in our own institutions and to steal our technology. The Chinese have stolen incredible amounts of technology, saving them billions and billions of dollars worth of R&D. So it's a not purely cyber, but cyber is at the heart of how it's proven to be such a surprisingly successful campaign that they're waging.
Well, so is this why you say the current definition of cyber warfare is too limited?
Yeah, I mean, we Americans are yes, no, black, white people.
Amen.
And the Chinese have 5,000 years of written history, and 2,000 more unwritten history. So they are masters of subtle, long-term conflict, and that we just don't grasp. We have never seen this pattern of conflict as a nation. I mean, Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, said the supreme art of war is to win without fighting. And students in China can recite that to you, and I mean, the entire nation has heard that, or most of the nation has heard that, and that's the strategy they are embracing, which is to erode and denigrate and cause crisis of confidence in our among ourselves, in our system, in our institutions. So it's pretty pervasive, but it falls short of the internationally accepted definition of war. It's not a kinetic war. It's a much more subtle phenomenon than that.
Well, so this is why you say in your book that though the Chinese Communist Party does present a lot of dangers to the U.S. in cyberspace, there won't be like a cyber Pearl Harbor or cyber 9/11.
Well, this has happened so gradually over such a number of years. When we had 9/11 in September of 2001, that resulted in the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. So we responded. We were galvanized. It was a sudden shock to our systems. This campaign has been unfolding for years, and it probably reached a tipping point in 2021 when solar winds happened and the Russians got into 18,000 different computing systems. The Chinese at the same time got into Microsoft's email exchange servers, and Log4j was compromised. So thousands of our computing systems have been compromised since that time. And now it seems that they're pushing the envelope, pushing the edges. The Chinese recently were caught trying to hack into American military's communications in Guam, which is an incredibly important location for any confrontation in the Pacific Ocean. And then there's a spy balloon, which is hotly controversial. I frankly don't buy the American military's argument that it was not conducting espionage and was not transmitting. If I were its controller or involved with managing the balloon, and it was flying across the United States over key military installations, would I really not be conducting espionage? Would I really not be trying to transmit those military frequencies back to China? And the other thing that's been so surprising is that they were in the State Department and Commerce Department's systems, their email systems, which are Microsoft-based. And so just at the same time that Anthony Blinken and Gina Raimondo were scheduled to travel there, the Chinese were inside our governmental email systems looking for clues as to what the Americans might be saying and thinking and doing. So they're pushing. I believe that they have accelerated their effort to monitor our communications and our decision making in our institutions, and at the same time, if in fact there was going to be a sudden outbreak of hostilities, the New York Times. This is what I'm about to tell you has appeared on the front page of the New York Times. It's not a wild man speaking to you. that the Chinese have planted malware in America's critical infrastructure, meaning electric, meaning water, meaning that type of thing that we all depend on. And the US government can't find it all. So the Chinese have planted malware in our critical infrastructure so that if there were to be a kinetic event, a physical confrontation, an open conflict, they would be able to cripple our infrastructure that would stop the military, but also would have spill-on effects into the civilian population. So they're seeking to have that kind of strength, that kind of position that they can see what we're doing and stop us from doing it.
Well, you said that, 9/11 galvanized the U.S. and produced the Department of Homeland Security. But like some of the things you're saying are pretty, shocking. And we've talked about a lot of these things over the years as well, like what you mentioned about, having access to America's power grids, things like that. So why do you think that Americans haven't been galvanized? Is it the U.S. government? Is it
Well, I agonize about this a lot. I mean, obviously, I'm trying to promote a book, and people meeting with great resistance, great denial, great hesitation. So I think two or three threads of it. I'll spell it out. One is the foreign policy establishment, the State Department and the President and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Brookings Institution. They believe that they're masters of foreign policy and of relations with foreign governments. And so they've been trying to, quote, stabilize the relationship or normalize it at the time when the Chinese are engaged in these actions that are so shocking. I think it's because they don't want to lose control of the management of the relationship, and they fear that if they acknowledge these things that I'm talking about, that it will blow up politically, that it will be an explosion in Washington. You can imagine Republicans saying to the Democrats, why haven't you stopped this? Why have you been so lax? That's one piece of the puzzle. The other piece of the puzzle is American business is caught in a terrible position. They have enormous investments in China, and the Chinese are clearly turning up the heat on them. It's demanding that they have access to the source code of any kind of computer system our companies are using in China, which gives them a platform to leap into the global systems of those companies. They're imposing increasing limits on the flow of information about business partners and supply chains. So American business is caught in a terrible position, and they don't want it to blow out of hand. They want to stabilize it. They want as best they can. I mean, it is not a stable situation, but American business wants to go softly. And the third element of it is that we have a large population of Chinese Americans. And we as a nation are committed to inclusion and having people come here from all over the world to contribute to our research, to contribute to our democracy. So if we start to say that there are Chinese among us who are working against our interests, that raises the risk of some backlash. And we've had them in our history. I mean, we're not blemish free. We have put Japanese in prisoner of war camps, and we've had the Chinese Exclusion Acts in the late 1800s. So I think people are concerned that if the full nature of what China is doing in our country became clear, that it would be a backlash against Chinese Americans and perhaps other Asian Americans, so that they also do not want this to blow up. So it's a complex answer to your simple question, but we essentially, you're right. We as Americans have not yet begun to respond in any meaningful way.
I mean, are those fears legitimate or are they exaggerated?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the diplomatic front, that if the administration were to acknowledge the full range of what the Chinese are doing, spy balloons and the rest of the two Chinese American young sailors in California recently, the FBI nailed them stealing secrets from the Navy and giving it to the Chinese intelligence services. If the full nature of this were acknowledged, it would blow up in Washington, and it would have political consequences. There would be a fight over it. And it would probably be a nasty fight. And I think that's what the Democrats are trying to avoid. American business they're scared. They don't have a good answer. I think their effort is to try to keep this as low key as possible, because if the drum beat were to become too intense, they would be under greater pressure to withdraw key sales efforts, or to other limits on flows of technology to China, flows of finance into technologically sensitive sectors. And so, a business, I think that's a legitimate fear. And the Chinese Americans, there's quite a broad spectrum of them. I've met Chinese Americans who emigrated from Guangdong or Fujian province and don't speak Mandarin and don't speak any Chinese. In fact, they've been here for so many generations. They have nothing to do with the Communist Party. So people like that are caught in a really tough spot. If they contribute to an understanding of what the Chinese are doing, that could they themselves be affected? So I guess the answer is that these fears are well founded. I think they're real.
Well, so then what can the U.S. do in this situation? Because it seems insane to me that, all these U.S. corporations who they've all been hacked by China, they've all suffered from China. China can hack our power grid, our water grid. Like these are serious issues, but
it does seem like if there is so much denial, you talked about facing a lot of denial when you were asking people or interviewing them for this book. Like, it just seems like everything you described, if it all just keeps going the way it is, doesn't it just get worse?
Well, yes. They are aggressively targeting our institutions. Let me give you one example of them. The Russians. A single Russian intelligence agency can create a website in English, polished English, that says teachers should carry guns in American schools, and that website becomes infiltrated into the social media fabric of our society. And that same Russian entity then creates a website that says it'd be sacrilege for American teachers to start carrying guns in American schools. That's an outrage. So then these two websites become inculcated into the American information ecosystem, and they start arguing with each other. And so, you asshole, you this, calling each other names and trying to inflame obviously the bitter partisan fights that we're having in this country. So, and the ultimate is, what about the election coming up in 2024? How can Americans have confidence in the integrity of this election if we're on the receiving end of the Chinese are using AI to generate images of the Statue of Liberty and twisting the images to tear at the sense of sanctity or respect that Americans have for these national symbols. So, and they're using AI. This is not in the future. This is already happening, and this also has been on the front page of the New York Times. So, I think that the ultimate price for this is that we have an election that is hung, or that we don't have confidence in, or there's some sort of crisis that has a serious impact on our democracy. So that ultimately is both the Chinese and Russian goal, is to demonstrate that democracy doesn't work, that our systems, our authoritarian systems, are far more capable and far more stable, and that democracy is messy and dirty. And so, this is a global battle, a global ideological struggle. And so to tarnish our democracy would be goal number one. And I think it's well within their reach.
Well, you mentioned the Russian groups setting up opposing websites to create controversy and distract from maybe more important issues. How does that compare to what Chinese websites are doing, Chinese state-run groups?
Well, the Chinese are advertising on Facebook, billions of dollars. They're advertising on, and they're posting on Twitter. Neither Facebook nor Twitter are allowed in China. So this is asymmetrical, that the Chinese can advertise on Facebook. They can do Twitter, the fake accounts on Twitter. Jeff Bezos, thank you very much.
Elon Musk.
Thank you very much, Elon Musk. They have both the Russians and Chinese control television and radio stations that are broadcast in the United States. And so it's part of a pervasive. And the Chinese also have learned how to bribe influencers, social media influencers. There was controversy over the Winter Olympics in 2020 and 2022, excuse me. And so they bribed influencers on social media to tell warm and fuzzy stories about the Olympics for an American audience. And most recently, one of the big Chinese shopping apps, either Temu or Shine, they're two major shopping apps now, among the most downloaded by Americans. The top four apps that are being most heavily downloaded are TikTok, Shine, Temu, and a fourth one that is an editing tool for TikTok. So we're being swamped with these Chinese applications. But in this case, the retailer took a group of influencers on a fake tour to China to show them how happy all the workers were. And so the influencers came back and said, no, there's no prison labor, slave labor involved in these goods. It's all happy. Everybody's happy. So the Chinese have penetrated to that level in our social media that they can reach out directly to the influencers to try to shape American perceptions of Chinese brands.
I think one of the problems is there's this arrogance in the U.S. that America has the best technology, made in China is crap. And especially with all of the sanctions on China recently with like high tech and chips, that there's no way China should have the capabilities to run roughshod over the U.S. in cyberspace.
Well, you're right. I mean, we invented these technologies. We invented the servers, the routers, the software. The whole ecosystem was driven by the Americans. And so we do have some arrogance about that who would dare to mess with what we, the Americans, have created? Aren't these tools so powerful and so sacred almost that no one would dare to penetrate them? And as a result of that attitude, I remember during the early days of the internet, we thought this was going to change the world. That the world would rise up and embrace democracy. That this would be people-to-people communications. We had these wildly naive and arrogant attitudes about the power of the internet. So guess what? We didn't take security seriously. A lot of the software in the internet and in use every day by corporations is open source software, meaning nobody knows where it came from. No one has really looked at the known vulnerabilities in it. So that it's like Swiss cheese. So that, I mean, you see the announcement, they don't get much attention, but Apple just announced 3 zero-day patches. What that means is they've just discovered 3 attacks on their systems that are 0-day, meaning no one has ever seen them before. So, and they issue patches. Microsoft is particularly vulnerable lately because they built such a infrastructure in China. They sell 70 products in China, and the Chinese have access to the source code for all of those. So that recently the attacks on the State Department and the Commerce Department were through Microsoft software, Microsoft in the cloud software. So technology companies the big tech companies are in a really bad spot because their systems are being abused by the Chinese. And so I don't think they could stop it because if they did stop it, they would be shut down in China. They would lose all their sales in China. So in some ways, they've become complicit in the strategies of the Chinese Communist Party. That's a pretty shocking statement, but I think it would stand up to the scrutiny.
I mean, I've heard of cases where access to critical systems in the U.S., like there was no password even protecting the systems.
Well, in SolarWinds, the Russians were able to get into that system because the password was something like SolarWinds, and then the password, the user ID was SolarWinds, and the password was administrator 123, something like that. So they were able to get in because we Americans hadn't taken proper safeguards to defend our systems. So then in that case, they were able to get in so deeply that SolarWinds is a company that makes software so that big companies can sort of see all their systems, big complex IT systems. And so SolarWinds makes a product called Orion. So the Russians were able to get in. And the way things work these days in the software industry is that there are frequent updates, frequent upgrades. As people improve or find problems, they issue upgrades that are downloaded automatically into the systems of their customers, their corporate customers, and they carry a signature on them that this is legitimate. The Russians were able to get into this product and insert malware and then apply a genuine signature to it so that when it was downloaded into corporate systems, that the systems administrators looked at it and said, that's Orion, that's a legitimate software upgrade. And in fact, the Russians had snuck in the door. So that's how sophisticated they've become and how lax we have become.
I mean, I can relate because I feel like anytime my computer tells me, hey, it's time for an upgrade, I'm like, I don't want to upgrade. The thing works. If I do an upgrade, something's not going to work.
Right.
Well, also, how many passwords do you have to come up with for different things, right? Like, I think like most Americans reuse the same passwords, or like,
yeah, I'm China guy 123. Oh shoot!
Oh no, Chris. But is there something that you would say that most Americans would not know about Chinese cyber attacks? You mentioned something called persistent access in your book. I think that's something that I didn't really know was happening beforehand. Could you explain some of that?
Well, they are in our systems. They are in our computers. It's not like they stage random attacks and then go away. And they have the capacity to hide in our systems for years, and particularly in our cloud computing systems that are so big and so complex. For example, the APT-10 case, Advanced Persistent Threat 10, which was revealed in 2018. The Chinese were in IBM's cloud computing systems for 4 years, got into dozens of different industries in different countries. And the feds finally figured it out and pulled the lever that expelled them, or we believe that they pulled it. But then Wall Street Journal asked IBM, is it true the Chinese were in your systems for 4 years? And the IBM guys said, what? We don't know anything about this. We never saw it. So the Chinese can get legitimate passwords and user IDs and operate as legitimate users in a lot of systems. The knowledge they want, they can exfiltrate that quietly through email servers or through servers that systems administrators are not looking for or looking at. So they have the capacity they are in our computers today, and so are the Russians. So that maybe many Americans don't recognize that or don't understand that.
The enemies are in the gate.
Do you think the U.S. government knows the whole scope of this?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we created the Department of Homeland Security in a state of emergency. This has been unfolding over so many years that we haven't been galvanized. We have not created a Department of Digital Services, which is something my co-author and I suggest that we do. There are so many different places of responsibility in the U.S. government for cyber. There's within the Homeland Security Department, there's CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, headed by Jen Easterly. Then you have NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, within the Department of Commerce, which tracks known vulnerabilities and issues and publicizes that information. In fact, they have a database of known vulnerabilities that's open to the public. And guess who has access to that? The Chinese Ministry of State Security has been observed going into that database and learning where all the known vulnerabilities are in America's computing systems. How insane is that? But so then you have FBI and you have NSA, CIA. You have all these different agencies with different responsibilities, but there's no cohesion to it. There's no coherence to it. There was Chris Inglis was named the digital czar at the White House level, but that position he left. He got fed up and left, and so as a result, there is no one in charge of America's digital strategy.
Wow.
So that's the situation.
I feel like every time we have a podcast, I'm horrified at something.
Yeah. So why is China doing this? Because it seems like the U.S., whether you're talking about the U.S. government or American businesses, they seem to have genuinely wanted to engage with China, do business with China, and the Chinese Communist Party has repaid kindness with enmity.
Well, I mean, I was there on the ground in 1979 when all this started, and so and lived there and lived in Hong Kong, southern China, and lived in Beijing, and I saw the early days of this, and there was great hope that the vision was that Americans business would go in, help the Chinese while they're making money for themselves, of course, and that this would create pluralism, that there would be, the internet would create a demand for the growing middle class to have greater political rights. That they, at one point, dissidents were able to exist and have lawyers, so that the Chinese allowed blossoming of a legal system, early stages of a legal system, and experimented with some democracy at the local level, the elections at villages, for example. And so Deng Xiaoping and Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, the three Chinese paramount leaders for 30 years, were willing to tolerate the emergence of a private sector in China, were willing to see the Communist Party somewhat marginalized. No one ever thought the Communist Party was going to go away, but it was willing to allow private sector to exist, allow a state apparatus to have some measure of independence. And so what changed the whole equation was one guy, Xi Jinping, who was from a different wing of the Communist Party, who is a Marxist-Leninist, a true Marxist-Leninist. And he has gradually accumulated power. He wiped out all his opposition in a corruption campaign early on. And now he's disciplined the private sector. Ask Jack Ma and Alibaba about what Xi Jinping really thinks. So, and he has been able, and because American businesses established such large presences in China during those years of hope, he's able now to exploit that and use them as avenues for his own influence in the world. So he changed. I've heard described as one of the worst geopolitical mistakes in the 21st century that we did not recognize early on who Xi Jinping was and what his ultimate objectives were. He means it when he says, when he went to Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin and said that we're about to do something that hasn't been done in 100 years. What he was talking about was the fall of the Romanov dynasty, the czars, and the Bolsheviks destroyed them. And in China, the fall of the Qing dynasty and the rise of the Communist Party, but as well as the Nationalist Party. But there was the collapse of the world order as it was established. That's what he has in mind. He wants to reorder the world with China at the heart of it. China is the most powerful and nation in every regard. So we've taken us a long time to put that together. We Americans have been slow to recognize the nature of who he is.
Well, I think in many ways it's a blessing that we are seeing what Xi Jinping is doing because, remember Deng Xiaoping talked about reform, but he also killed all those students in Tiananmen. Jiang Zemin talked about reform, but he killed thousands, maybe millions of Falun Gong practitioners. Hu Jintao cut his chops persecuting Tibetans. So there was a lot of horrible things going on.
Well, and also
in
not
China,
just human rights issues in China, but the Great Firewall of China.
That was the Jiang Zemin thing, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and the intellectual property theft has been going on well before Xi Jinping took power.
Right. So
this isn't new.
What's interesting now is we see Xi Jinping, this Marxist-Leninist, as you say, and we should thank him because he's making us all more aware of all the horrible things that are actually happening.
Well, I mean, one of the questions I've had is he overdoing it? I mean, he crushed Hong Kong. He's sending missiles over Taiwan. He's harassing the Filipinos and the Japanese. He's using economic power to punish the Australians for daring to ask for an inquiry into the origins of COVID. He even punished Lithuania for allowing Taiwan to establish a consulate or some sort of presence in Lithuania. So he is asserting power in the world in a way that is creating some resistance, some backlash. I ask myself, what if he'd waited 3 or 4 more years and pursuing a more subtle, long-term campaign and not being quite as brazen, quite as obvious? Might that have persuaded the world not to respond? Might that have might the world still be asleep at the switch if he'd been just a little bit more subtle about it. But for whatever reason, he's a gambling man. He's betting that his increasing assertion of power in the world is going to win, and that it won't create a backlash against him. So this is part of the nature of an autocratic regime with just one guy really making all the decisions. He's not listening to any voices telling him, "Oh, you may be going too fast, too far, too aggressively. Slow down." But there's no one telling him that.
Oh, because they'd be thrown into
they would be disappeared.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's come out that even with the spy balloon, nobody told Xi Jinping that it had gotten lost over the U.S.
Well, that's the story that's emerging now. But I think that whether it's their intelligence agencies or our intelligence agencies, are trying to make him appear to be blameless, that he didn't really know about it. But I question that if the PLA had a campaign of putting balloons in the near space and going around the world, that Xi Jinping wouldn't know about it. At some level, I find that hard to believe.
Well, so again, this has been happening for a long time. It began before Xi Jinping came to power. So I would just wonder if you had any insight to why this has been a thing the Chinese Communist Party has been doing for decades.
Well, we know about that within the Communist Party. There are different wings, different voices within the party, and that there were people who were aggressive and wanted to start projecting more power in the world. But I think that until Xi Jinping, that those voices were marginalized. I mean, there was a book written, 100-Year Marathon, and any number of books have been written about the theories, about the writings of different thinkers within the Communist Party that pointed out that they had these instincts to want to become the hegemon in the world. But it wasn't until, in my view, recent years of Xi Jinping that we've seen it happening at full bore, that now they're trying to execute on all those ambitions they had and never really acted on.
Well, I mean, the two PLA colonels came out with the book Unrestricted Warfare, and late 90s?
Right.
So I think that has definitely been sort of the modus operandi for the Communist Party for quite some time.
They wrote that in reaction to the Gulf War. They saw what our forces were able to do, taking advantage of information technology to really cream Saddam Hussein's forces, and they knew that they had the same kind of old Soviet armaments and old Soviet weapons, so they took that war very seriously, and went to study all the different aspects of how we used IT. And then the other big shock they had was Edward Snowden disclosing in 2013 that the NSA had penetrated the systems that Huawei had built on basis of stolen technology from Nortel. But that was another major shocking blow to them. So they have been gradually, they built a great firewall, of course, but they have been gradually building up their capabilities to the point that now they have these APT groups, advanced persistent threat groups, that target specific countries and specific technologies around the world. And it's not just the Ministry of State Security or the PLA that are engaged in these activities, that even parts of the Chinese government, like the Ministry of Commerce or Ministry of Telecommunications, they are also engaged in efforts to steal technology. So, as one expert told us, that when you look at a country and what their efforts are to steal from other countries or to conduct espionage in other countries, usually it's one or two institutions. It's the NSA or CIA, or in the Russia case, it was the KGB or the GRU. But in the case of China, there are many different players in this space, and making it far more difficult to understand the pattern of what they're stealing.
And didn't China also train North Korea in how to conduct cyber espionage? I think that was in the late 90s or early 2000s.
I'm not sure, frankly, about that. The relations between the Chinese and North Koreans are extremely complex, and the Chinese might have given them some training, but would be reluctant to give them too much because the North Koreans would use it against the Chinese. So the North Koreans' capability is they're smashing and grabbing. They're not engaged in the penetration of cloud systems for multiple years. They're trying to break into financial institutions and steal money, because that's what they really need. They need money. So they've also become real specialists in the cyber Bitcoin world. So the North Koreans crashed the Sony servers in Hollywood because of the movie making fun of Kim Jong Un. They did that through DDoS, distributed denial of service, and that's a pretty primitive instrument. They crashed it, and it was obvious that they had done it. So I don't think the North Koreans are quite at the same level as the Chinese are.
What was interesting is that, obviously the perpetrators of these attacks are the Chinese and the Russians, but you mention in the book that, Americans have all kind of contributed to this problem, from the private sector to the government to individual Americans. And you kind of touched on some of the things the private sector and the government are doing. What about individual Americans? How have we contributed to the problem?
Well, during the pandemic, Americans started working remotely. Understandably, I'm not quarreling with that. And they started using their personal devices to access the corporate networks, or they bring a corporate device home and leave it plugged in overnight. So the whole idea that you could have a secure perimeter for these large corporate IT systems has been shattered, because Americans have mixed their personal devices up with their corporate devices. So the corporate world is having to recognize that they have to go to something called zero trust. They have to build in more checks and balances within their internal systems, so they can prevent the Chinese from getting in and then escalating their privileges to a system administrator level, where they can largely control the systems. But the individual Americans also are clicking on phishing software, and they're using single factor authentication when they should be using multiple factor, two factor authentication. I mean, Americans, and TikTok is the ultimate in American cooperation and our own destruction. 140 to 150 million Americans are using TikTok, and this is an algorithm from China, written in China and controlled from China, that can see your face, biometric signals on your face, whether your eyes go wide or whether you hyperventilate, where you breathe harder when you see some content. They can measure how long you look at the content, how deeply you engage with it. They ping your system every hour, so they know where you are, and they get lists of your contacts. They get lists of all the other applications your system may be using. So Americans have flocked to this. And others, the Shine and Temu, Americans are flocking to these things, and they're so intensely involved and emotionally engaged with these systems that politicians don't dare take action. I mean, if I were president, I would say TikTok is banned as of tomorrow. Unplug all the servers. Everybody go home. It's over. Let LinkedIn take over. Let others take over these functions. But the reason no one does that, Gina Raimondo explained it in her trip in Beijing, that any political leader that shut down TikTok would lose the votes of all Americans under the age of 35. Americans under the age of 35 believe that their rights, that this is their right to use this platform, even if it has national security implications. National security, that's the government's problem. This is us. This is us now. We now want to have fun on this highly addictive algorithm application, and we don't care what it means to national security. So that right there in the heart shell is that, in a nutshell, is that Americans are not either not sophisticated enough to understand this game, or they don't care.
I think that is the biggest challenge to getting this issue addressed. Is just your average American. You talk about Chinese cyber espionage, and their eyes kind of glaze over. And
right.
They don't want to know.
I mean, on the other hand, Pew says that 70% of Americans have a unfavorable view of China. So it's not that they think that China's super trustworthy or whatever, but
It's just something about talking about like the cyber is just what
the cybers.
The cybers. I'm bored. I got to get back on TikTok and see something. I need more serotonin.
Well, I wonder if also we've just gotten into a culture of sacrificing security for convenience, basically. Like,
yeah, I mean, the whole IT system is built on that concept that we want to have fun on the internet. We want to have the joy of accessing and communicating with people all over the world, but and companies want to make money from the IT systems, of course, and so we have these short-term preoccupations with fun, profit, reaching out, and as a result, we have not built our system. Our system's architecture is very open. Our software is very open. Our cloud computing system is vulnerable, and we haven't cared. We have not cared about that, and so it might. Traditionally in America, to get people to wake up, it takes a real crisis, a real bang moment, a real 911. So the Chinese and Russians have been careful enough that they know that, and they have avoided that. So I agree with your point that Americans are having trouble wrapping their brains around this. My wife's a psychologist. Every author should be married to a psychologist. So when I express my frustration to her about why can't I get people to take these things seriously, she says, listen, Bill, we've just come through a pandemic. Everybody's worried about their health. We're worried about wildfires and floods and climate change. I mean, that's increasingly people are preoccupied with that. We're worried about mass violence in our cities and schools and temples and churches, people getting killed virtually every week. And we're worried about the toxic, bitter political divide on virtually every issue. We just can't handle talking about this. My co-author's wife, Teresa, also says, I love you, honey, but I just don't care. So you're right that we are preoccupied with these other things, and that it's really hard to get Americans to pay attention.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like what am I going to title this episode to get people to click? I'm thinking maybe something like top 10 sexiest trends on TikTok.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about all these things that are like, occupying our minds more than Chinese and Russian cyber espionage. But like also like 15 minutes ago, you were talking about how the Russians are creating these opposing websites that are stirring up controversy that are getting Americans to pay attention to that. Right. So I think it's a beautiful circle of life.
Well, they're more skilled at making Americans pay attention than we are. That the American media, the American governing system. So they know how to grab people.
So you talk about TikTok and the political fallout that would happen for banning it. I mean, is there a way to ban TikTok? Because like India did it, and that was 3 years ago.
Right, they did it. Right, they banned 50 or 60 different Chinese applications because they could recognize that the Chinese were building a whole ecosystem, a whole digital ecosystem that would be funneling data back to Beijing. So the Indians said, just cold turkey, they shut down all the Chinese activities in India, all the Chinese IT, cyber kind of activities. So, and they're one of the only nations in the world that has done that. So that's the kind. I mean, the Chinese are expanding their influence through this Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, Latin America, and elsewhere, and with their HIC vision cameras, which are watching smart cities. So the cameras and computers are monitoring traffic, monitoring water, monitoring electricity, smart cities, helping the managers manage their cities. But they're also, through the back door, feeding that data back to Beijing. So the Chinese are able to observe a lot of things that are going on in the world. Let me tell you one story. This story it encapsulates the power of data. They've stolen so much data. They from the federal government Office of Personnel Management, 22 million employees had their security documents stolen. Then from Marriott and United Airlines, they stole other data about passports, passport numbers, frequent flyer miles, all that. our healthcare system is wide open, and they've been able to get any healthcare information they want. Essentially, it's unprotected. Then from the Equifax, they got tens of millions of personal financial records. So they can add up this point, and let's take an individual. Oh, he's got problems with his credit rating. His health is not bad, or his wife's health is not good, and they can draw a profile of prominent Americans involved in the intelligence and military sectors. And so my co-author, Mike McLaughlin, told me, I would never have guessed this, that the Chinese can create a digital portrait of our top military and intelligence people. That means that they cannot go to China because they'll be tracked and monitored. They cannot go and meet any Chinese national, even if it's for just information gathering or relationship establishing kind of visits, because the Chinese government can track the Chinese natives, individuals, as well as the foreign intelligence or military. So our capacity to be active in China and the world, their facial recognition systems in East Africa, for example, they would be able to recognize the faces of certain American military or intelligence personnel if they found them in Kenya or Uganda. And that information would go back to China. So there's incredible power involved in the collection of this data and the use of the data to track and identify and track different prominent Americans.
And I just still can't believe it. Like, all this is happening, and you said the U.S. doesn't even have a cyber czar looking after this anymore.
No, we really, what my co-author and I advocate is we need to concentrate the digital functions that are now spread through the government into one Department of Digital Services. And this department would be able to increase the training we need more training. The U.S. government doesn't have enough people to manage and monitor its systems. Some U.S. government systems were built in the 70s or 80s. So can you imagine? And so we need a department that can build up the IT capabilities of people, of getting cooperation going between the FBI, CIA, NSA, CISA within Homeland Security. They don't necessarily share information with each other about the threats that they see on the networks that they monitor. So, and they certainly don't share it with the private sector. I mean, so imagine the U.S. government, different parts of the U.S. government know about certain bad actors, but they don't tell the private sector about it.
And they don't tell other sections. Like, that was something that was surprising to me. Like, the FBI is not talking to other government agencies that could be affected by these intrusions.
Maybe a limited case-by-case basis, but you think that between what the Pentagon has, their cyber command, and the NSA, CIA, FBI, you would think that they would have, and Homeland Security would have some mechanism set up where they can shield their own sources and their own knowledge about how they found out about these threats that exist on the networks, but they would be able to share that across the key agencies of the U.S. government. But frankly, they don't trust each other enough to do that. The CIA and the FBI hate each other. The Defense Department hates the intelligence community, and vice versa. So we are hobbled by these intramural not hostilities but rivalries. So that's why we need, at the White House level, at a Department of Digital Services, a director who can force a greater measure of cooperation, a greater measure of protection of our systems, modernization of some systems, and systematic training of more IT and cyber administrators. So that's what's missing, is from our, as someone put it, the U.S. government is not organized for the digital era, for the internet era. The U.S. government has not changed its structure at all.
Basically, you're talking about the creation of a cyber force.
Well, that's a different thing, right? Like the cyber force you talk about is different. It's kind of more like
a space force, air force, cyber force.
Modeled on the Coast Guard, so that we would have an entity that would have intelligence capabilities and privileges, and also be able to arrest people that they catch. The problem with CISA within the Department of Homeland Security now is they have responsibilities for only about half of the 16 or 17 critical infrastructure sectors we have. And they don't have the power to go into those companies' systems to hunt for bad actors, and they don't have the capacity to arrest anybody. So they don't have the full range of capabilities that we would need to really put a stop to this pattern of cyber penetration.
And it's interesting you also talked about having reserve forces in the cyber force.
Well, that's my co-author's areas of knowledge. I know that he was suggesting that we create a cyber force. What do you mean reserve force?
Oh, like the National Guard.
Well, yeah, that we'd have a digital Coast Guard that would have multiple functions and be able to move from these different sectors: intelligence, law enforcement, and even arrests of people. So that would be it would be loosely associated with the Department of Digital Services, but would not be 100% under its control.
It's one thing to have the power to make arrests, which obviously we may not have when it comes to cyber crimes right now.
And we can't find them. Usually they're hidden in North Macedonia or someplace.
Right. Well, so that's the thing, right? Because you have jurisdictional issues too. Like it's not like, you can arrest someone in California or Arizona who's committing these crimes. They're completely out of jurisdiction. And in many countries, they're out of extradition jurisdiction. Like China, obviously, we don't have an extradition treaty with China or with Russia.
Right.
So I mean, you can't arrest people, but we know who they are, maybe. But what do we do?
You're right that the pattern here is it's global. That a Chinese APT group could have servers in 20 or 30 different countries, and so the Chinese could come at you from a server in Macedonia or Albania, and there are no Chinese fingerprints on it. You have no idea where it's coming from. But then there are other activities that are happening within the continental United States that can be subject to American law enforcement. For example, in some cases, the Chinese come in and they set up, they rent servers in the United States and use those servers to conduct their activities, and then fold and go away before the NSA or FBI can get warrants to crack down on them and arrest them. So we could greatly improve that situation by having a Department of Digital Services and just having a government that can take action sooner and not have to wait weeks or months to get a warrant to break up a malevolent attack.
I mean, but aren't warrants like kind of a good thing because they create due process before you go and arrest people?
Well, this again gets into the issue of Americans worried about their individual rights. I mean, Americans have asked me and Mike on several occasions, well, what you're talking about means in some senses we have to become more authoritarians and our rights are going to be at risk. And he and I keep saying, no. We believe that the American system is flexible enough that we can continue to protect individual rights, individual liberties, but just organize ourselves in ways that we can catch the bad guys without running roughshod over the rights that Americans hold to be so dear. I mean, we point out that the American Constitution, the American system is built to protect the rights of individuals. And that's the framers of the Constitution were acutely sensitive to that. Whereas the Russians and Chinese, their systems are built to enhance the rights and the power of the Communist Party and to run roughshod over their own individuals. So this is another great source of resistance. You ask about where is the resistance coming from? It's people who worry that we'll overshoot and we'll do things that are heavy-handed or authoritarian. So you're right in saying that warrants should be a good thing, but maybe there's a way to get them faster, more efficiently, and cut through the red tape faster so that we can take action against the people who need to be acted against.
Well, certainly the great thing about the Department of Homeland Security is that it has never overshot its what it was supposed to do. So no one needs to worry. But, okay, so this actually leads me into an important thing, because in any kind of discussion like this, people will say, well, isn't America doing the same thing that China and Russia is doing? Like you mentioned Snowden and the NSA.
Right, right. Well, I think that we have pretty robust intelligence operations going on, but I don't think that they're nearly as robust as what the Chinese have. I mean, we obviously saw that the Russians were going to invade Ukraine. We know about the interactions between Prigozhin and the Wagner Group. So we have pretty good penetration of the Russian system. Not nearly as good, though, with the Chinese, because the Chinese have the Great Firewall, because they've been building up their capacities for so many years to resist our ability to penetrate. I think that it's asymmetrical. I don't think that we have nearly the same insights into what's happening in their Ministry of Foreign Affairs as they have what's happening in our Department of State. So that I'm sure that our guys are trying to figure out what's going on inside China, but I think that they're severely handicapped. One reason is just language. That Chinese, when I was there, they were learning English on VOA and BBC radio broadcasts in the parks in the morning. The Chinese have taken the study of English very seriously. So there are millions of Chinese who speak English. But we have not taken the study of Chinese nearly as seriously. And so we are handicapped by that alone. Even if we got inside a Chinese decision-making system, would we be able to understand what's happening? I'm not at all sure we would.
That's a good point. I mean, like the language barriers, like the specific Chinese language used in cyber, that whole world that I can't even articulate in English. Imagine trying to have to figure it out in Chinese too.
I mean, on the other hand, that is a weakness, I think, for the CCP, because there is a level of arrogance there that there's no way that these people will figure out what. So, for example, a few years ago, one of the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations were being accused of having links to the Chinese consulates, and they were all denying it. But then in Chinese, on their websites in Chinese, it's said that they had links with the Chinese consulate, and they just assumed that there would be nobody, no journalists could possibly read Chinese and see those links, The
other question we get asked a lot is the data collection is going on. Google and Microsoft and Apple, they're all gathering data. How's that any different than what the Chinese are doing? And so why are you picking on the Chinese? Well, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and all these guys, they want the data so they can sell you something. They want to make money off the data. So if you send an email to somebody about a trip you have planned to Atlanta, let's say, then you shouldn't be surprised if an ad pops up on Google saying, here's a hotel in Atlanta. But that's purely for making money. They are not using that data in a way that's going to compromise national security, or in a way that's going to result in you being arrested for something you didn't do. It's fairly benign when compared to, nobody likes it. I don't like it. But Americans accept it. Americans accept that so much data about them is being collected. But there is a difference between what our private sector is doing and what the Chinese government is doing.
You mean this isn't a plot by the Chinese Communist Party to sell Xi Jinping's governance on China to Americans?
Through Amazon, you mean?
Through Amazon, yeah.
Yeah, right. Here, Xi Jinping, the hero on Amazon, bestseller on Amazon, right.
Well, they did get Amazon to make a special Chinese books, propaganda book section. So, but I think one thing that's interesting about your book, Bill, is that essentially the second half is what should we do about how to respond to these. And I think that's another tricky thing that comes up. We've talked a little bit about the government response. What about the private sector or individual Americans? What should the response be there?
Well, corporations have not taken their data seriously, protecting it seriously. Here's the thought process that goes on in the boardroom. I'd say this 95 or 90 more percent of American companies think this way. Okay, we have data systems here, and how much money do we want to spend this year on protecting them? So the chief technology officer says, or chief information officer says, we got to spend this much money. The board and the CEO says, no, we can't spend that much money. Well, but that means these systems are vulnerable. Well, so the management says and boards say, well, let's bring in an insurance company in, and let's bring in a cybersecurity company like Mandiant or CrowdStrike, and let's hire lawyers. And so that if in fact there is a breach, the insurance companies will pay for it. We're not going to pay for it. So therefore, it's cheaper to pay for insurance policies and lawyers and cyber consultants than it is to spend the millions of dollars it would take to genuinely protect their systems. So the private sector knows that their systems are not secure, and because they want to make money every quarter and want to increase their earnings every quarter, are reluctant to spend the money that it would take. I mean, that's just one glaring omission. The other glaring problem is that our software industry, the way you write a software program, you may write, let's say, 10,000 or 20,000 lines of code, but then you borrow code from GitHub and other repositories that do repetitive things that someone else has figured out how to do. Like Log4j was login technology. You know, you enter this word and the password and the user ID and password, and you're in. So you package your proprietary software with software that you've borrowed from these open repositories, and then you sell that. You package that all together, and then you sell that. But you don't know whether there are any known vulnerabilities in software that you've borrowed. So and you don't care. You don't. I mean, there's no one is promising. No one is demanding that you guarantee that you're delivering vulnerability-free software. We don't do that. People are buying software without demanding that it be vulnerability-free. So the way our private sector thinks and operates makes them vulnerable.
You also mentioned some things about kind of the issue of manufacturing in China and trying to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. And the semiconductor industry is an interesting case study.
Very. Well, so Americans still design the most sophisticated chips, Qualcomm, for example, and we have the software that allows these very sophisticated chips to be designed. That comes from Cadence, CADENCE, another California company. And so we have the lithography tools. We have ASML in the Netherlands is one of the world's most sophisticated when it comes to making the lithography equipment that can be used to make the most sophisticated chips. But so we have these tools and the knowledge, but the Taiwanese and South Koreans are leading the way in actually manufacturing these chips. And so the Chinese are getting involved in packaging the chips, and they're getting in at the lower end of the spectrum of sophistication. So what we're trying to do as a result of the CHIPS Act is bring more of the manufacturing back to the United States so that we can develop and own and control the very advanced, most advanced semiconductor manufacturing, and it won't leak out to the Chinese. So this is one of the most ambitious experiments in human history to try to prevent a nation state as sophisticated and as wealthy as China from developing a critical industry. So it's a great experiment. The voices against it argue that, well, this will only accelerate the Chinese efforts to develop their own sophisticated semiconductors. And they announced proudly when Gina Raimondo was there that Huawei had built a new 5G cell phone using a sophisticated chip. There's still some doubt about whether that was purely a Chinese chip or was it using some American tools or American components that had been obtained through third parties. But I think we have to try. I don't think we can simply sit by and wait for the Chinese to develop sophisticated chip technology that would fuel their AI and quantum computing initiatives. We have to, I believe, try to manage the situation.
It's interesting what you talked about, the need for consumer electronics to come back to the U.S. too for manufacturing, not just the semiconductors. Could you kind of explain what the relationship there is?
Well, it's, again, very complex can of worms, but if we have American manufacturing of semiconductors happening here on our soil, we don't want then to send those chips to East Asia to be packaged and to be incorporated into electronic devices, and then have those devices sold back to us wouldn't it be more efficient and safer from a national security point of view if we actually made more of our own consumer electronics? Right now, all of our consumer electronics essentially is either manufactured in China or has componentry from China. So that it's a critical vulnerability. So there are multiple reasons we should do it, because it's more efficient and would support these semiconductor plants that we're building, but also it would reduce the ability of the Chinese to penetrate our systems.
And, this is kind of an interesting fusion of how do you get private sector companies to care about national security issues, right? Because, I'm sure there are a lot of companies that did not like the CHIPS Act that wanted to sell these advanced semiconductors or the equipment to manufacture them to China. So how do you negotiate that? Does it always have to be like the U.S. government stepping in and saying that's not allowed?
Well, you're asking one of the big questions. I mean, CEOs still believe in the religion of globalization. They believe that their responsibility is to go anywhere in the world, sell anything that they can sell, and maximize their profitability everywhere in the world, so that they can drive up their share price and, P.S. also drive up their personal compensation, and that they have no responsibility for national security. I mean, this is a religion that entire generations of American CEOs have embraced. How do you break through that? Well, I think maybe there may be some sticks involved, but I also think that there should be some carrots involved. That an American president or American leader needs to have a very heart-to-heart conversation with the heads of some of these companies that say, "Hey, we're getting taken apart here. We're losing because we're not playing on the same team." So the sticks could be penalties if we find that a particular sensitive technology is being used by the PLA, then there could be a fine, or there could be some sort of humiliation in public. But I think it has to be a combination of sticks and carrots, because I don't think at the end of the day the American government can force all these technology giants and other private sector entities to simply obey the national security dictates.
I wonder also if there's a way to kind of incentivize, like you're talking about carrots, right? Like, I'm surprised that, Meta, who owns Instagram, which is a direct competitor of TikTok, isn't in support of like, oh, hey,
let's ban TikTok.
Let's, TikTok has national security. I mean, I don't know if they would come out and say, let's ban it, because I don't think they don't want the U.S. government to be able to someday say, let's ban Instagram. But like, the idea that like national security is a concern, et cetera, I'm surprised that they're not kind of trumpeting the whole, like, we're made in the U.S. kind of angle.
They're making billions of dollars a year from Chinese advertising on Facebook. So they don't want to be caught being overtly anti-Chinese, because they would hurt their revenue. It would hurt Mark Zuckerberg's portfolio. So their CEOs right now are dealing with very complex challenges. They want to resist, if they can, resist Chinese penetration, but they don't want to go so far as to anger the Chinese, because that would threaten their sales in China. So they're in a very tough spot.
All they have to do is secretly fund activist groups that oppose TikTok.
Well, I don't think that. Well, the thing is, it is going to always be a losing game for them in China. Like, ultimately, the CCP is always going to come down on the side of TikTok and ByteDance, which they can control. They're not going to let Instagram into China. Like, that's
no.
Yeah.
This is one of the truly historic situations where our companies have deeply ensconced themselves into the fabric of the Chinese economy. And our economy also is deeply dependent on China. You go into Home Depot or Walmart, pick it up, where's it made? China, China, China. So that it's taken us decades to create this globalization model where two largest economies on the planet are deeply interpenetrated. So how do we unwind that or de-risk that, or how do we move forward in an era where we don't really trust the Chinese Communist Party is an issue of historic proportions. I hope I live long enough to see how it plays out.
Yeah, the whole idea was that this would prevent war, but it just created a different type of war.
Right. Exactly right.
Well, after listening to you today, I think I've decided to become a Luddite. That is the solution.
Yeah, I don't think we should have anything to do with social media, Chris. Certainly not have an entire company based on producing YouTube videos.
All
The
right.
internet was a mistake. That's all I'm saying.
Amish Uncovered. That'll be our show, but it
Just
won't be on
Shouting
TV.
on street corners.
Yeah.
There we go. That's the
They go back to the original way of political communication.
We'll become prophets.
How do
Perfect.
you feel about horseshoes?
It's a gray zone. It's a little too technology heavy for me.
Right.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us. Once again, the book is Battlefield Cyber, How China and Russia Are Undermining Our Democracy and National Security. We'll put a link below so people can check it out, hopefully pick up a
Great.
copy and get interested in this very important topic.
I mean, I think it was a fascinating book, especially since I think a lot of times we talk about these things that are like, it seems like insurmountable almost. And I find that you guys have had like very specific and concrete suggestions for ways to, respond to the issue that seems like almost insurmountable. So I think that was a great part of the book.
Thank
Better
you.
than-
So go on Amazon and give us a 5-star review and tell the world what you think.
And is there anywhere else people can follow you?
Well, my website is williamjholstein.com, my full name.com. I'm on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. And so I'm not active on Facebook at all, though. Sorry.
How about TikTok, WeChat?
I'm not on TikTok. I do have an X account, a Twitter account, but I can't quite figure out where that story is going. So I'm hearing from people that they're finding Twitter to be less useful than it used to be. That the new ownership is beginning to change it in ways that it's not as much fun. There's not as much thrill to it.
I mean, you can't beat TikTok for fun. That's all I'm saying. Well, Bill, thanks for joining us.
I've never so much as looked at an image of TikTok because I'm concerned that it would capture my phone. The application would get into my phone. So I'm very concerned about looking at TikTok images.
Yeah, to be clear, I would recommend no one have TikTok anywhere near their phone. Don't download it. Don't watch a video. It is bad news, as you've made it very clear.
Thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate your interest and your level of knowledge about what's in the book, and that's just great. So let's go sell some books.
Yes. Yeah, the challenge really is to get Americans interested in this. I think we'll title the episode "Top 10 TikTok Dances to Do While Eating Tide Pods." They'll love that. They'll eat it up.
Will that work for us?
I don't know. We can try. That's all we can do.
We can
Try.
to.
But yeah, the fact that there's just so little being, like, there's no one in charge of this. Like, the cyber force idea is really interesting. I mean, yeah, we need some kind of superhuman samurai cyber squad to
Cyber with
deal
an
with
S.
this. Cyber with an S.
Oh my gosh!
I've been waiting an hour to use that.
I didn't think about. I forgot about that show, but I think we used it in some China Uncensored episode or something.
We've used it at some point.
But I hadn't thought about that show, and that's a deep cut. I feel like
That's still how I understand computers.
Is that like they're little monsters that look kind of like dinosaurs?
Well, those are the viruses.
The viruses.
I think. That and Reboot shaped how I understand technology.
I never saw Reboot, but I did watch Superhuman Samurai Cyber Squad, which I don't know what that says about me. But
I'd be,
Good taste.
I'd be interested in knowing what our viewers were influenced by growing up in terms of how they think about computing. So, like, leave your comments below. That'd be kind of cool.
There's going to be a huge generational divide here.
I know, but it'll be interesting to see.
I'll definitely check that out.
Yes.
So, thank you for writing. I can say that in this one because it makes sense in context. Thank you for writing and watching. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Chong.
And I'm Matt Ganesta.
And we'll see you next time.
It's going to be like 99% The Matrix.
Yeah, probably. But which one?